Welcome, history enthusiasts. Today, we drift back into the dense jungles and towering cities of the ancient Maya civilization, a world of astonishing achievements, but also of daily struggles and relentless challenges. Join us as we uncover why life was truly brutal for the Maya, exploring their labor, beliefs, battles, and survival strategies that shaped one of the most fascinating civilizations in history. Imagine stepping into a world that is both breathtakingly beautiful and brutally unforgiving, a world where survival was never guaranteed and where every day was a struggle against forces far beyond human control. This is the world of the ancient Maya, a civilization that thrived in the dense jungles and rugged landscapes of what is now southeastern Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, and western Honduras. At first glance, the Maya environment might seem like paradise. Forests were rich, teeming with diverse flora and fauna, rivers ran through the valleys like lifelines, and the tropical climate provided warmth year-round. But beneath this veneer of abundance lay a constant and unrelenting struggle. The jungle, while rich, was also a formidable adversary. Thick undergrowth, towering trees, and tangled vines made travel arduous, isolating communities and complicating the movement of people and goods. Pathways were often overgrown, and the risk of encountering venomous snakes, jaguars, or other predators was real. Every step outside the safety of one's village required vigilance. The environment itself demanded respect, and the Maya learned early that the jungle could be as dangerous as it was generous. Farming was the cornerstone of Maya survival, but it was far from simple. The civilization relied heavily on agriculture, particularly the cultivation of maize, beans, and squash, often referred to as the Three Sisters, because of the way these crops complemented each other nutritionally and agriculturally. Maize was the most crucial, forming the staple of the Maya diet, but its cultivation was fraught with challenges. The tropical climate was unpredictable, and rainfall could swing between extremes. A season of heavy rains could flood fields, washing away seeds and destroying young plants. Conversely, periods of drought could parch the soil, causing crops to wither and fail entirely. Famine was not a theoretical threat. It was a harsh reality that could strike entire communities, leaving populations vulnerable and desperate. To mitigate these risks, the Maya developed ingenious methods of farming adapted to their environment. Terracing on hillsides helped control water flow and prevent erosion, while raised fields in swampy areas allowed cultivation in places that might otherwise have been unusable. Irrigation systems, canals, and reservoirs were constructed to manage water supply, ensuring that crops had access to moisture even during drier periods. These innovations demonstrate not only the Maya's ingenuity, but also the constant pressure they faced to adapt in order to survive. Yet even with these agricultural advances, survival was never guaranteed. The Maya had to contend with pests, soil depletion, and the limits of their farming technology. Certain areas of the jungle were rich in fertile soil, but others were rocky or sandy, requiring enormous labor to make them productive. Planting and harvesting crops demanded long hours of backbreaking work, often under the intense sun, and the yield was never assured. A single failed harvest could mean the difference between sustenance and starvation for an entire village. The psychological toll of this uncertainty cannot be overstated. Families lived with the constant anxiety that their efforts might be in vain, that the elements could undo months of labor in a matter of days. Beyond agriculture, the Maya relied on hunting, fishing, and gathering to supplement their diets. The jungles and rivers provided a diverse array of wildlife, from deer and peccaries to fish, turtles, and birds. Hunting required skill, patience, and knowledge of animal behavior, as well as the ability to track, trap, and kill without modern tools. Fishing techniques varied, with the use of nets, spears, and even fish poisons derived from plants. Gathering edible plants, fruits, nuts, and roots required intimate knowledge of the land, as consuming the wrong plant could be deadly. The jungle, while a source of sustenance, was also a constant reminder of the precariousness of life. The climate itself was both a blessing and a curse. The warm temperatures allowed for year-round cultivation, but humidity and heat created their own hazards. Mosquitoes and other insects carried diseases that the Maya could not understand or treat. Illnesses spread quickly in communities, particularly during the rainy season when stagnant water provided breeding grounds for insects. The combination of environmental hazards, disease, and the constant threat of crop failure created a life that was physically demanding, mentally exhausting, and precariously balanced on the edge of disaster. Living in such an environment required a deep understanding of the land. The Maya developed detailed knowledge of soil types, seasonal patterns, and local flora and fauna. They observed the behavior of animals and birds to predict weather changes, and they developed sophisticated calendars to guide planting and harvesting cycles. Despite this knowledge, they were never entirely in control. Nature was a powerful force that could overwhelm human effort, reminding the Maya that survival required both ingenuity and humility. Transportation and communication posed additional challenges. The dense forests made overland travel slow and dangerous, limiting trade and interaction between city-states. Rivers were used as natural highways, but navigating them required skill, and flooding could make them treacherous. The isolation of some communities made them vulnerable to starvation, disease, and attack. In times of drought or famine, these challenges were magnified as the movement of food and resources became even more critical. The Maya's reliance on maize also shaped their society and culture. Corn was not only a staple food, but also a sacred element in Maya mythology and religion. The cultivation of maize required constant care and attention, tying the cycles of agriculture to religious and ceremonial practices. Planting, tending, and harvesting crops were not merely economic activities. They were deeply intertwined with the spiritual and social fabric of Maya life. Rituals to ensure good harvests were common, and failure in agriculture could be interpreted as a sign of divine displeasure, adding an additional layer of stress and responsibility for both commoners and elites. Daily life for the average Maya was a relentless cycle of work and survival. Men, women, and even children contributed to the labor required to sustain their communities. Men typically cleared land, hunted, fished, and built structures, while women tended crops, prepared food, and participated in domestic production, including weaving and pottery. Children learned these skills from an early age, understanding that their contributions were essential to the survival of their family and community. Leisure was scarce, and the comforts we take for granted today were unimaginable in such a precarious environment. In addition to the physical challenges, the Maya faced constant psychological stress. The knowledge that one misstep, whether in farming, hunting, or social conduct, could have catastrophic consequences weighed heavily on every individual. The unpredictability of nature, combined with the demands of society and religion, created a world where vigilance, skill, and resilience were essential for survival. Despite these hardships, the Maya were remarkably innovative. They built cities with towering pyramids, elaborate plazas, and complex infrastructure. They developed mathematical and astronomical systems that rivaled those of ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia. Yet all of these achievements occurred against the backdrop of an environment that was as unforgiving as it was inspiring. Their accomplishments were not the result of a comfortable life, but rather a testament to human ingenuity and perseverance in the face of constant adversity. The jungle shaped the Maya not only physically, but also culturally. It influenced their myths, their rituals, and their world view. The ever-present challenges of nature fostered a deep respect for the land and its forces. Their art and architecture often reflected natural forms, while their religious beliefs emphasized the need to maintain balance with the environment. Survival was a holistic endeavor, involving not only physical labor, but also spiritual observance, social cooperation, and intellectual ingenuity. In this context, life for the Maya was a delicate balance between exploitation and respect for the natural world. They harnessed the resources of their environment, yet they recognized that the land could not be conquered entirely. Their relationship with nature was one of adaptation and resilience, marked by both triumph and constant struggle. Every crop planted, every animal hunted, and every building constructed was in negotiation with forces far larger than themselves. The environmental challenges of the Maya world also had long-term consequences for their civilization. Soil depletion, deforestation, and overpopulation in certain areas placed additional stress on their agricultural systems. Droughts could lead to famine, social unrest, and conflict between city-states. Natural disasters, from floods to hurricanes, could devastate communities and disrupt the delicate balance of Maya society. In essence, the environment was both a provider and a punisher, shaping every aspect of daily life, from nutrition and health to politics and religion. Yet, despite these brutal conditions, the Maya not only survived, they thrived for centuries. Their ability to adapt to their environment, innovate in agriculture and infrastructure, and create a complex, enduring culture speaks to their extraordinary resilience. Life was harsh, unpredictable, and often cruel, but it was also full of ingenuity, community, and profound connection to the land. The Maya demonstrate that human beings can endure incredible hardship, using creativity, cooperation, and determination to carve out a place for themselves even in the most challenging environments. The harshness of the Maya environment shaped everything about their civilization, from daily labor to religious rituals, from social hierarchy to political structure. Survival demanded constant effort, careful planning, and unwavering vigilance. Yet in facing these challenges, the Maya created a culture of astonishing complexity and beauty, one that continues to captivate and inspire us thousands of years later. The jungles of Mesoamerica were a world of danger, scarcity, and unpredictability, but within that world, the Maya found ways to flourish, leaving behind a legacy that reminds us of both the fragility and the resilience of human life. The social structure of the ancient Maya was a complex and rigid system that dictated every aspect of daily life, shaping the way people lived, worked, and even thought. Unlike modern societies where social mobility exists at least in some form, the Maya were born into roles that largely determined their status, opportunities, and obligations. This hierarchical system was not merely a form of organization, it was intertwined with their religion, culture, and survival. The consequences of one's place in society were profound, affecting everything from access to food and resources to participation in sacred rituals and protection from violence. The upper echelons of Maya society, the kings, nobles, and priests, enjoyed privileges and luxuries that most could not imagine, but these benefits came with immense pressures. The lower classes, comprising the majority of the population, bore the burden of labor, sacrifice, and service, sustaining the civilization while living under constant strain. At the pinnacle of this social pyramid stood the king, or Keuhul-Ajah, meaning sacred lord. The king was not just a political leader. He was considered the intermediary between the gods and the people, a living embodiment of divine authority. His power was absolute, yet it was also precarious. Kings were expected to maintain the favor of the gods through ritual, warfare, and governance. Any failure, whether a lost battle, a poor harvest, or a neglected ritual, could be interpreted as divine disfavor. Such a loss of spiritual legitimacy could trigger rebellion among nobles, undermine the loyalty of subjects, and even result in assassination. Being a king in the Maya world was therefore not a life of carefree luxury, but a position of immense responsibility, constant scrutiny, and relentless pressure. Every decision had consequences, both earthly and cosmic, and the weight of expectation rested heavily on the ruler's shoulders. Below the king were the nobles, a class of elite families who wielded power through governance, military command, and religious authority. Nobles had access to resources, education, and privileges far beyond those available to commoners. They lived in elaborate homes, adorned themselves with jade, feathers, and other symbols of status, and enjoyed the finest food and clothing. Yet, despite these advantages, their lives were far from free of danger or stress. The nobles were expected to demonstrate loyalty to the king, to manage their estates efficiently, and to participate in complex religious ceremonies that required skill, preparation, and often personal sacrifice. Failure to uphold these responsibilities could lead to political downfall, social ostracism, or worse. The nobles' privilege was inseparable from their obligation. Wealth and comfort came at the cost of constant vigilance, duty, and performance. Priests, meanwhile, held a unique and essential role in Maya society. They were responsible for maintaining the delicate balance between the human and spiritual worlds. This included conducting rituals, interpreting celestial movements, maintaining sacred texts, and advising rulers on matters of state and religion. The priesthood was highly specialized and often hereditary, with knowledge passed down through generations. Priests were educated in complex calendars, astronomy, and hieroglyphic writing, giving them authority that extended beyond mere ritual, yet their position was also fraught with risk. Religious failure, such as misinterpreting the god's will or neglecting sacred ceremonies, could provoke disasters like famine or disease, for which the priest and, by extension, the society might be blamed. Their lives were intertwined with the cosmic order, making every action a potential matter of life and death for the community they served. The commoners, who made up the bulk of the population, lived lives defined by labor and obligation. Farmers, artisans, builders, and traders all worked tirelessly to support the elite and maintain the complex infrastructure of Maya cities. For a commoner, daily life was a relentless cycle of toil, often from dawn until dusk. Fields had to be cleared, crops planted and tended, homes constructed and maintained, and goods produced for trade or tribute. Food security was never guaranteed. A single miscalculation in planting, a pest infestation, or a sudden drought could threaten entire communities with famine. While nobles and priests performed rituals to appease the gods, commoners supplied the labor and produced necessary to sustain those rituals, ensuring the continuation of the social and spiritual order. Labor obligations were enforced through a system known as tribute. Commoners were required to provide food, goods, or labor to their lords, temples, and rulers. Tribute could take the form of maize, cacao, textiles, or building materials. While this system supported the civilization's infrastructure, it also placed enormous pressure on the lower classes. People had little control over their own resources, and failure to meet obligations could result in punishment. The labor system created a society in which survival depended not only on skill and effort, but also on compliance with rigid social expectations. Those who could not fulfill their duties risked starvation, exile, or even death. The division of labor was not only practical, but also deeply symbolic. Every role reinforced the social hierarchy and the belief that order was maintained through obedience and duty. Men and women had distinct responsibilities that were culturally prescribed and crucial for the survival of their families and communities. Men typically cleared land, hunted, and built infrastructure, while women managed domestic responsibilities, including farming, cooking, weaving, and childcare. Children learned these roles early, training in the skills they would need as adults. Education was not optional. It was a form of preparation for the responsibilities and dangers of adult life. Each member of society contributed to the whole, yet the burden was unevenly distributed, with the lower classes carrying the greatest weight. Marriage and family life also reflected the pressures of social hierarchy. Arranged marriages were common, often designed to strengthen alliances between families or consolidate political power. Individuals had little choice in whom they married, and personal desires were secondary to family and social obligations. Women, in particular, were expected to fulfill domestic roles, bear children, and contribute to household labor, often under challenging conditions. The social structure dictated not only work but personal relationships, leaving little room for personal autonomy. The pressures of hierarchy extended to ceremonial life as well. Religious and social obligations required participation in rituals that could be physically and emotionally demanding. Commoners might be called upon to provide labor for temple construction, participate in festivals, or support sacrificial ceremonies. Failure to participate properly was more than a social faux pas. It could be interpreted as disrespect to the gods, potentially bringing misfortune to the individual, family, or community. The integration of religion and hierarchy created a society in which compliance was not just expected but essential for survival. Education, while limited for commoners, was another arena in which social hierarchy manifested. Elite children received instruction in reading, writing, astronomy, mathematics, and ritual practices, preparing them for leadership roles. Commoners, however, were educated through experience, learning the practical skills needed for farming, hunting, crafting, and other essential tasks. Knowledge itself was stratified, reinforcing social boundaries and ensuring that power remained concentrated in the hands of the few. Even leisure and recreation were shaped by social status. Nobles might enjoy games, music, and dance, often as part of religious ceremonies or political events. Commoners had far less opportunity for recreation, as survival and labor took precedence. Festivals and public events were communal, but participation was structured by class. The elite's enjoyment often came at the expense of the laboring majority, reinforcing the inequality embedded in the social system. The consequences of social failure were severe. Those who did not fulfill their expected roles faced not only social stigma, but tangible punishments. Laborers could be punished for neglecting fields, artisans for producing faulty goods, and commoners for failing tribute obligations. The enforcement of social norms was both practical and symbolic, reinforcing the authority of the elite and the necessity of order in a society where survival was never guaranteed. Fear, respect, and duty were interwoven into the fabric of daily life, creating a system in which the survival of the community depended on the unwavering compliance of its members. Hierarchy also shaped political life and the distribution of power. States were ruled by kings supported by noble families, each vying for influence, resources, and military advantage. The loyalty of subjects, particularly commoners, was crucial. Rebellion or unrest was a constant concern for rulers, as social order was fragile and dependent on the compliance of the population. Political strategy, marriage alliances, and religious legitimacy were all tools used to maintain power, highlighting the interconnectedness of social hierarchy, governance, and survival. Despite the rigidity of this system, the Maya civilization thrived for centuries, demonstrating remarkable resilience. The social hierarchy provided structure and organization, allowing for the coordination of labor, the construction of cities, the cultivation of crops, and the performance of complex rituals. Yet it also imposed relentless pressure on individuals, particularly those at the lower levels, who bore the brunt of labor, tribute, and obedience. Life was not just physically demanding, but socially and psychologically challenging, as every person navigated expectations that could mean the difference between survival and disaster. In essence, Maya society was a delicate balance between privilege and obligation, power and responsibility. The elites enjoyed wealth, influence, and prestige, but their position demanded constant performance, strategic acumen, and religious devotion. The commoners sustained the civilization through labor, skill, and compliance, yet they lived under conditions of immense pressure, vulnerability, and limited freedom. Social hierarchy was not simply a system of organization. It was a fundamental force that shaped every aspect of Maya life, from work and education to ritual, family, and survival. Through this lens, it becomes clear why life for the ancient Maya was often brutal. The demands of hierarchy, combined with environmental challenges, labor expectations, and religious obligations, created a society in which every individual faced constant stress, responsibility, and risk. Survival required skill, obedience, ingenuity, and endurance, and failure could have catastrophic consequences. Yet in the midst of these pressures, the Maya built a civilization of extraordinary complexity, achieving remarkable feats in architecture, mathematics, astronomy, and art. Their social system, while harsh, provided the framework that allowed this civilization to flourish against the odds, leaving a legacy that continues to fascinate and inspire us today. For the ancient Maya, life was not only a struggle against nature and social pressures, it was also a world constantly shadowed by warfare and violence. Unlike modern societies, where war is often remote from daily life for most citizens, in the Maya world, conflict was an omnipresent reality. City-states were never truly isolated from threats, and the landscape itself often became a stage for battle. Maya city-states such as Tikal, Calakmul, Kapan, and Palenque were centers of power, wealth, and influence, but they were also focal points of tension, competition, and bloodshed. The reasons for war were multifaceted: the desire for control of trade routes, access to fertile land, political dominance, and the acquisition of captives for ritual sacrifice. Every military campaign carried the weight of social, political, and spiritual significance. Warfare in the Maya world was highly organized, and preparation for battle began long before the first clash of weapons. Young men trained rigorously from childhood, learning skills that would be essential for survival on the battlefield. Archery, spear throwing, hand-to-hand combat, and tactical maneuvering were taught through drills and mock battles. Physical conditioning was rigorous, and the ability to endure exhaustion, hunger, and injury was essential. This training was not only a matter of military preparedness, but also a cultural expectation. Warriors were celebrated in art and mythology, and bravery in battle was tied to honor, social standing, and spiritual merit. A failure to fight effectively could bring shame to one's family, community, or even one's city-state. The weapons of the Maya were simple yet effective. They relied on bows and arrows, spears, atlatls, wooden clubs embedded with obsidian blades, and occasionally small shields for defense. While lacking metal weaponry, the Maya made ingenious use of available materials. Obsidian, a volcanic glass, could be fashioned into razor-sharp blades capable of cutting through flesh with devastating efficiency. The preparation and crafting of weapons itself required skill, and warriors often carried personalized tools that reflected both their status and experience. The battlefield was thus both a place of chaos and of precise skill, where the right combination of training, strategy, and bravery could determine life or death. Maya warfare was rarely indiscriminate. Battles were often conducted with clear objectives, whether territorial expansion, protection of resources, or capture of prisoners, yet the violence was immediate and tangible for those involved. Cities were fortified, and attacks could involve siege tactics, ambushes in dense jungle terrain, or direct confrontation on open fields. The chaos of battle was intensified by the unpredictable nature of the environment. Dense forests could conceal enemies, rivers could impede movement, and heat and humidity drained the strength of even the most seasoned warriors. Survival required not only skill with weapons, but also situational awareness, physical endurance, and mental fortitude. Captives held a particularly grim significance in Maya warfare. Those captured in battle were rarely spared. They were often used in ritual sacrifices to appease the gods, ensure victory in future battles, or maintain cosmic balance. Being taken prisoner was a fate feared by all, as it often meant a slow, ceremonial death in the service of the gods. The practice of human sacrifice was intertwined with religious belief and political strategy. Leaders could demonstrate their power and devotion by presenting captives to the gods, and cities could intimidate rivals by publicizing the fates of prisoners. The fear of capture added another layer of intensity to every conflict, making warfare a constant source of existential anxiety for warriors and civilians alike. Violence was not limited to organized warfare between city-states. Internal conflicts, including rebellion, personal vendettas, and disputes over resources, also contributed to a culture in which physical aggression was normalized. Kings and nobles often used violence to assert authority, punish disobedience, or maintain control over laborers and commoners. The threat of execution, mutilation, or public punishment was ever present, reinforcing social hierarchies and ensuring compliance. Ordinary citizens lived in a society where both external and internal violence were intertwined with political, religious, and social structures, creating an environment in which danger was omnipresent. The rituals of warfare and sacrifice were deeply intertwined. Battles were not only a matter of survival or territorial control, they were acts with spiritual significance. Success in battle was seen as evidence of divine favor, while defeat could be interpreted as a sign of God's displeasure. Leaders and priests conducted ceremonies before, during, and after conflicts, invoking deities for protection, guidance, and victory. The outcomes of warfare were therefore not merely measured in territory or captives, but also in the perception of spiritual legitimacy and cosmic balance. This spiritual dimension added a psychological burden to combatants and leaders, as every action carried consequences beyond the physical realm. Civilians were not exempt from the effects of warfare. Cities could be besieged, crops destroyed, and populations displaced. Families often had to contend with the fear of attack at any time, knowing that raids could result in loss of property, enslavement, or death. The constant threat of violence shaped daily life, influencing decisions about where to live, what to grow, and how to interact with neighboring communities. Trade and diplomacy were often inseparable from military considerations, as alliances and rivalries dictated patterns of exchange and travel. The omnipresence of danger created a society in which vigilance, adaptability, and resilience were essential for survival. The psychological impact of warfare on the Maya cannot be understated. Children grew up hearing stories of battles and sacrifices, learning to fear both distant enemies and the consequences of failure within their own society. Young men trained for combat, aware that their skill with weapons might determine their survival. Women and the elderly faced uncertainty, relying on the protection of warriors while contributing to the community in ways that sustained the city-state during times of conflict. The culture of violence permeated every aspect of life, instilling both fear and respect for the power wielded by rulers, warriors, and the gods themselves. Even beyond immediate combat, the preparation for war was a continuous process. City-states maintained standing armies, fortified structures, and strategic alliances. Intelligence, gathering, diplomacy, and espionage were part of the political landscape, as leaders sought to anticipate threats and assert dominance. The logistics of sustaining an army, feeding, arming, and organizing warriors was a monumental task that required coordination across social classes. The elite directed these efforts, but the labor, resources, and compliance of the lower classes were indispensable. Failure in preparation could lead to defeat, captivity, or destruction, reinforcing the constant pressures imposed by a society shaped by conflict. Warfare also influenced Maya culture and art. Murals, carvings, and codices frequently depict battles, warriors, captives, and sacrifices. These representations were not mere decoration. They were records of events, expressions of ideology, and tools of social cohesion. By commemorating victories, the elite reinforced their authority and legitimacy, while also instilling a cultural memory of the consequences of failure. The omnipresence of martial imagery served as both warning and inspiration, shaping the values, beliefs, and behaviors of the population. The brutality of Maya warfare extended to the treatment of prisoners and conquered populations. Those who survived the battlefield often faced enslavement, forced labor, or ritual execution. Cities could be destabilized by invasions, leading to displacement, famine, and social upheaval. Even in times of peace, the threat of renewed conflict loomed, making life unpredictable and often terrifying. The reality of violence shaped not only the physical environment of Maya cities, but also the social and psychological landscape, reinforcing the harshness of everyday life. At the same time, warfare was an avenue for social mobility for certain individuals. Brave warriors could earn recognition, rewards, and status through valor in battle. Successful generals and soldiers could rise in influence, gaining privileges, titles, and wealth. Yet this potential reward came at enormous risk. Death, injury, or capture was always a possibility, and the line between glory and oblivion was thin. The culture of martial honor intertwined opportunity with danger, creating a society in which courage and skill were both celebrated and demanded. The unpredictability of war also reinforced the Maya's religious beliefs and rituals. Every battle, victory, and defeat was interpreted through the lens of divine will. Leaders and warriors sought the favor of gods, performed bloodletting ceremonies, and offered sacrifices to secure protection and success. The interplay between warfare and religion made conflict not merely a human affair, but a cosmic one. The consequences of failure extended beyond the battlefield, threatening the balance of the world itself. Even city planning and architecture reflected the omnipresence of conflict. Fortifications, defensive walls, watchtowers, and elevated platforms were integral to the design of Maya cities. Strategic positioning of temples, palaces, and plazas allowed for both defense and surveillance. These structures symbolized both physical security and social power, reinforcing the authority of the elite while providing protection for the populace. The environment itself was transformed by the demands of warfare, blending practical necessity with symbolic expression. Violence, therefore, was not simply an occasional disruption, but a fundamental aspect of Maya life. It shaped politics, social hierarchy, religion, art, psychology, and urban planning. Every individual, from king to laborer, was implicated in this culture of conflict, whether through direct participation, provision of resources, or adherence to social and religious norms. The omnipresence of danger, combined with the cultural and spiritual significance of warfare, created a world in which brutality was normalized and survival was never certain. Despite the constant threat of violence, the Maya civilization flourished. Their ability to organize armies, conduct complex campaigns, and integrate warfare into a broader social and religious system demonstrates remarkable resilience and sophistication. Yet this resilience came at a profound human cost. Life for the average Maya was fraught with danger, fear, and obligation, and the reality of war was inseparable from daily existence. Survival required not only skill and strength, but also knowledge, strategy, and unwavering adherence to societal expectations. The culture of warfare reinforced other aspects of Maya life, from hierarchy and labor to religion and education. It demanded obedience, courage, and sacrifice, embedding a sense of urgency and danger into every action. For commoners, the battlefield might seem distant, but its effects were immediate, through tribute, forced labor, or participation in ritualized violence. For elites, the stakes were even higher, as political power, spiritual legitimacy, and personal survival were intimately tied to the outcomes of conflict. In essence, the world of the ancient Maya was a world where violence was inescapable, pervasive, and deeply integrated into every aspect of life. Warfare shaped society, culture, and the human experience itself. It was both a practical necessity and a spiritual imperative, a source of terror and opportunity, of death and prestige. Every battle, every raid, every act of aggression carried consequences that rippled through families, communities, and city-states. The brutality of life under such conditions cannot be overstated, yet even in this environment of constant danger, the Maya achieved extraordinary accomplishments. Their cities rose majestically from the jungle, their art and architecture flourished, and their understanding of mathematics, astronomy, and writing reached remarkable heights. These achievements were made possible not despite the omnipresence of violence, but in the context of it. The challenges of warfare, the pressures of hierarchy, and the fear of death forged a civilization that was resilient, resourceful, and enduring. Life for the Maya, then, was inseparable from the realities of conflict. Every individual navigated a landscape in which the threat of violence was always present, in which survival depended on skill, courage, and obedience. The civilization's enduring legacy is a testament to their ability to thrive under conditions that were often brutal, demonstrating both the cost and the resilience inherent in one of the most fascinating cultures of the ancient world. Religion in the world of the ancient Maya was not a separate aspect of life. It was the very framework upon which all of existence rested. For the Maya, every action, every event, and every moment of daily life was imbued with spiritual significance. The universe was a delicate balance of forces, maintained through the correct performance of rituals, offerings, and sacrifices. The Maya believed that the gods controlled every element of the natural and human world: rainfall, harvests, fertility, war, disease, and even death itself. To live successfully, to survive, and to thrive, humans had to constantly appease these deities, lest their wrath bring famine, disease, or catastrophe. Religion was not a matter of personal belief alone. It was a societal imperative, a system of rules, rituals, and expectations that governed the lives of kings and commoners alike. The Maya pantheon was vast and complex, with gods representing natural forces, celestial bodies, and abstract concepts. Each god had its domain, and neglecting the proper rituals could provoke misfortune. Chak, the rain god, controlled the essential water for crops. Without his favor, droughts could devastate communities. Kukulkan, the feathered serpent, was associated with wisdom, fertility, and kingship. Gods of death, war, and disease were feared, as their displeasure could strike without warning. The interconnectedness of the divine and the human meant that the Maya lived in a constant state of vigilance, aware that every misstep could have consequences not only for themselves, but for their entire community. Rituals were the primary means through which humans communicated with the gods. These rituals varied from small, personal offerings to grand, sponsored ceremonies involving large portions of the population. Food, textiles, incense, and precious objects were common offerings, carefully prepared and presented according to tradition. Yet the most significant and terrifying rituals involved blood, the life force that the Maya believed was the most powerful form of offering. Bloodletting, in which nobles or priests would pierce or cut themselves, was a common practice. The blood of rulers was considered especially potent, serving as a conduit between the human and divine realms. This practice was not only symbolic, but also a public display of piety and responsibility, demonstrating to the populace that the elite were willing to sacrifice their own vitality to maintain cosmic balance. Human sacrifice, however, represented the most extreme and feared form of devotion. Captured enemies, prisoners of war, and sometimes children were offered to the gods in elaborate ceremonies. These sacrifices were not acts of cruelty for cruelty's sake. They were deeply religious acts, believed essential to the survival of the city-state, the prosperity of crops, and the favor of the gods. Rituals were highly choreographed, performed by priests and observed by the public, and they reinforced both spiritual and political authority. For the average Maya, these ceremonies were both awe-inspiring and terrifying, a reminder of the power of the gods and the fragility of human life. Sacrificial rituals could vary greatly in form and significance. Some involved ceremonial decapitation on temple platforms, while others involved the extraction of hearts, a practice that symbolized offering the life force directly to the gods. In some cases, individuals were thrown into sacred cenotes, deep natural sinkholes believed to be portals to the underworld. These rituals were often timed to coincide with astronomical events, agricultural cycles, or major festivals, reflecting the Mayas' sophisticated understanding of celestial movements and their belief that timing was crucial to ensuring divine favor. The preparation for such sacrifices was meticulous, emphasizing that these acts were not random but part of a carefully structured system of cosmic and societal order. The psychological weight of religious expectations permeated every level of society. Nobles and priests carried the responsibility of performing these rituals correctly, aware that mistakes could bring disaster. Commoners, while less directly involved, were still deeply affected. They provided labor, food, and goods necessary to conduct ceremonies, participated in festivals, and observed rituals whose outcomes could influence their survival. The constant pressure to maintain divine favor created a pervasive sense of anxiety, as failure could mean not only spiritual consequences, but also tangible hardship, such as famine, disease, or warfare. Religion was thus both a guiding principle and a source of profound stress, demanding attention, devotion, and obedience from all members of society. The integration of religion into governance and social hierarchy was another defining feature of Maya life. Kings were considered sacred intermediaries between the gods and the people. Their authority rested on both political power and spiritual legitimacy. A ruler's ability to perform rituals, interpret omens, and maintain favor with the gods was crucial to their rule. Public ceremonies often served to reinforce this authority, with rulers demonstrating piety and bravery through acts of bloodletting, sacrifice, and ritual performance. These events were spectacles designed to inspire awe, fear, and respect among the populace, reminding them of the consequences of failing to uphold societal and religious norms. Education, too, was intertwined with religion. Priests and scribes were trained in the complex calendrical and astronomical systems that guided ritual timing. Knowledge of glyphs, sacred texts, and ceremonial protocol was essential to maintain the connection between the human and divine realms. This specialized knowledge conferred authority and prestige, but also carried the weight of immense responsibility. Mistakes in ritual calculations or ceremonial execution were not trivial errors. They were believed to jeopardize the well-being of entire communities. For the elite, mastery of religious knowledge was both a privilege and a burden, reinforcing the idea that spiritual competence was inseparable from political power. Religious festivals and ceremonies also reinforced community cohesion and social hierarchy. Festivals involved music, dance, feasting, and ritual performance, with each participant's role carefully prescribed. Commoners were expected to contribute labor and resources, while elites and priests conducted the most visible and spiritually significant acts. These events reinforced the social order, emphasizing the interdependence of classes and the necessity of obedience to divine and political authority. They also served as reminders of mortality and the ever-present influence of the gods, embedding the awareness of human fragility into the cultural consciousness. The fear of divine punishment shaped everyday behavior. Individuals lived under the assumption that neglecting duties, failing rituals, or committing acts of disrespect could provoke misfortune. Children were taught from a young age about the consequences of failing to honor the gods, instilling a deep sense of moral and spiritual responsibility. Ethical behavior, social compliance, and ritual observance were inseparable from the practical need for survival. The gods were seen not as distant figures, but as active forces whose favor was essential for the continued prosperity of families, communities, and city-states. Religion also had a profound impact on Maya art and architecture. Temples, pyramids, and ceremonial plazas were constructed as sacred spaces, oriented according to celestial alignments and designed to facilitate ritual performance. Murals, carvings, and codices depicted gods, mythological narratives, and sacrificial ceremonies, serving both aesthetic and didactic purposes. These artistic expressions reinforced religious beliefs, celebrated divine authority, and communicated moral and cosmological principles. Through these creations, the Maya materialized their understanding of the universe, embedding spiritual meaning into the very structures of daily life. The consequences of failing to uphold religious duties were tangible and immediate. Crop failure, disease outbreaks, or natural disasters could all be interpreted as signs of divine displeasure. In times of crisis, the pressure to perform sacrifices and rituals intensified, and entire communities might mobilize to appease the gods. The stakes of religious observance were immense, reinforcing the idea that life was precarious and survival dependent on spiritual vigilance. Fear, respect, and devotion were deeply intertwined, creating a society in which religious practice was not optional but essential to every aspect of existence. For the average Maya, the integration of religion into labor, agriculture, and social life meant that even mundane tasks carried spiritual significance. Planting and harvesting crops, preparing food, weaving textiles, and constructing buildings were all activities performed in accordance with ritual calendars or in observance of religious principles. Success in these endeavors was interpreted as evidence of divine favor, while failure could be a sign of spiritual imbalance. Religion permeated the mundane, transforming daily life into a continuous negotiation with forces far beyond human control. The fear and awe inspired by religious authority also reinforced political power. Kings, priests, and nobles leveraged their roles in ritual to maintain control, using the perceived favor of the gods to justify decisions, punish disobedience, and consolidate influence. Public ceremonies, sacrifices, and ritualized displays of power were tools of governance, intertwining spiritual legitimacy with political authority. For the population, participation in these events was both a duty and a survival strategy, reinforcing obedience and social cohesion. The interplay between religion and mortality was especially significant. Life was understood to be fragile, and death was ever present, whether from disease, warfare, or sacrificial ritual. Religious practice provided a framework for understanding and coping with this mortality, offering a sense of order and meaning in an unpredictable world. Sacrifices, offerings, and ceremonies were not merely symbolic. They were believed to actively sustain life, ensure cosmic balance, and prevent catastrophe. In this context, religion was inseparable from survival, shaping decisions, behavior, and societal structure. The psychological impact of this religious world cannot be overstated. Constant awareness of divine power and potential punishment created a pervasive sense of anxiety and responsibility. Individuals internalized the need for obedience, moral conduct, and ritual observance, knowing that their actions could have consequences for themselves, their families, and their community. This internalization of religious expectation reinforced social order and cultural continuity, embedding the authority of the gods into the very psyche of the people. Even the rituals surrounding death were deeply religious. Burial practices, offerings to the deceased, and funerary ceremonies reflected beliefs about the afterlife and the continuing influence of ancestors. Kings and elites were often buried with elaborate goods, including jade, pottery, and ritual items, to ensure their continued favor and influence in the spiritual realm. Commoners, too, participated in rituals honoring ancestors, reinforcing the interconnection between life, death, and divine order. These practices underscored the Maya understanding that the spiritual world was ever present, shaping both the living and the dead. Through all of these practices, religion created a society in which human life, cosmic order, and social hierarchy were inextricably linked. The demands of ritual, sacrifice, and spiritual observance were immense, affecting every individual regardless of social class. Life was structured around the maintenance of divine favor, and survival depended on adherence to a complex system of spiritual, social, and political obligations. The brutality of this system lay not only in its physical manifestations, such as bloodletting and human sacrifice, but also in the psychological and social pressures it imposed on every member of society. Despite the harshness of these religious obligations, the Maya civilization flourished for centuries. Their devotion to ritual and sacrifice allowed them to create a cohesive society capable of sustaining large cities, complex infrastructure, and sophisticated cultural practices. Religion provided the framework for governance, education, agriculture, and art, integrating every aspect of life into a single cosmological vision. While the demands were extreme and often terrifying, they also fostered resilience, ingenuity, and a profound sense of purpose. In essence, religion in Maya society was both the source of life and the justification for sacrifice. It created a world in which obedience, devotion, and ritual practice were essential to survival. The gods were ever present, and their favor determined the success or failure of crops, cities, and individuals. Life was brutal, precarious, and filled with responsibility. Yet through these challenges, the Maya built a civilization of extraordinary complexity, leaving a legacy of architecture, art, and cultural achievement that continues to captivate the modern world. The integration of religion and sacrifice into every aspect of life demonstrates how belief and practice can shape societies, influence behavior, and define the human experience itself. Life in the ancient Maya world was never guaranteed, and nowhere was this more evident than in the ever-present threat of disease and mortality. Unlike modern societies, the Maya had no understanding of germs, bacteria, or viruses. They could not control the spread of illness through medicine or sanitation, and even minor infections could escalate into life-threatening conditions. The dense jungles, tropical climate, and close living quarters created ideal conditions for disease to thrive, making health a constant and precarious concern. Every step outside the safety of one's home or village carried the risk of encountering pathogens that could weaken, incapacitate, or kill. Survival was a daily negotiation with forces beyond human control, and mortality rates were high across all ages, genders, and social classes. The tropical environment of the Maya homeland contributed significantly to the prevalence of disease. Heat, humidity, and stagnant water created breeding grounds for insects such as mosquitoes, which could transmit diseases like malaria and other fevers. Waterborne illnesses were common, as rivers and lakes, though essential for drinking, fishing, and transportation, could harbor pathogens. Contaminated food and poor hygiene practices further increased vulnerability to disease. The Maya had developed sophisticated water storage systems and methods for food preparation, but these were limited in their ability to prevent infection. Outbreaks of illness could strike entire villages with little warning, decimating populations and destabilizing communities. Malnutrition compounded the threat of disease. While the Maya cultivated maize, beans, and squash as dietary staples, crop failures were frequent due to drought, floods, pests, and soil depletion. Poor harvests led to famine, which weakened the immune system and made individuals more susceptible to illness. Children and the elderly were particularly vulnerable, often succumbing to diseases that a well-nourished person might withstand. Even minor injuries could become fatal if infection set in, as the lack of effective medical treatments meant that simple cuts, bites, or wounds could escalate into life-threatening conditions. The constant interplay between malnutrition and disease created a cycle of vulnerability, making survival a precarious balance of luck, skill, and resilience. Child mortality was exceptionally high in Maya society. From the moment of birth, children faced an environment filled with dangers. Infections, congenital conditions, malnutrition, and accidents claimed many lives in early childhood. Infant mortality rates were staggering, and surviving childhood was a remarkable feat. For parents, this reality was both tragic and familiar. The loss of children was a constant possibility, shaping family structures, emotional resilience, and social expectations. Despite the high risk of death, children were essential to the continuation of labor, social systems, and family lineage, creating a tension between hope and fear that defined family life in the Maya world. Adults, too, faced constant threats from disease. Infectious illnesses could spread rapidly through densely populated villages and urban centers, where communal living and shared resources facilitated transmission. Respiratory infections, gastrointestinal diseases, and parasitic infestations were common, and treatments were limited to herbal remedies, rituals, and spiritual interventions. The Maya relied heavily on shamans and healers who used a combination of medicinal plants, incantations, and ceremonies to address illness. While some treatments were effective for minor conditions, many diseases could not be cured, and death was an ever-present reality. The unpredictability of health created a society in which vigilance, preventative care, and spiritual observance were essential strategies for survival. Plagues and epidemics had particularly devastating effects on Maya society. When disease struck, entire communities could be weakened or destroyed, disrupting agriculture, labor systems, and political structures. Epidemics could exacerbate food shortages, lead to social unrest, and increase mortality among the most vulnerable populations. These crises often forced communities to adapt rapidly, whether through migration, rationing of resources, or increased reliance on ritual and spiritual intervention. Disease was thus not only a biological threat, but a social and economic one, capable of reshaping entire states, and influencing political and cultural developments. The Maya's understanding of disease was framed through a combination of observation, experience, and spirituality. Illness was often interpreted as a sign of divine displeasure or imbalance within the community. Shamans, priests, and healers played critical roles in diagnosing, treating, and preventing disease, using ritual, prayer, and herbal medicine. Certain ailments were believed to be caused by malevolent spirits or the violation of taboos, and treatments often involved both physical remedies and spiritual appeasement. The integration of medicine and religion reflects a world in which human health was inseparable from social, spiritual, and environmental factors. The consequences of failure were immediate and tangible, reinforcing the precariousness of life and the constant vigilance required to survive. Injuries from labor, accidents, and warfare further compounded mortality risks. The demands of agriculture, construction, and hunting were physically intense, often resulting in injuries that could become infected. The dense jungle environment presented additional hazards, including venomous snakes, jaguars, and other predators. Even minor injuries, if left untreated or improperly cared for, could lead to fatal infections. The ever-present risk of injury meant that physical strength, agility, and careful attention to safety were essential for survival, yet even the most cautious individual remained vulnerable. Life expectancy for the Maya was considerably lower than modern standards, reflecting the combined impact of disease, malnutrition, labor, and violence. While elite individuals often lived longer due to better nutrition, access to care, and protection from the most hazardous labor, they were not immune to illness or death. Epidemics and poor sanitation could affect individuals regardless of status, and even the privileged were subject to the psychological pressures of knowing that death could arrive unexpectedly. Mortality shaped social structures, family dynamics, and cultural practices, influencing everything from inheritance and succession to labor allocation and ritual observance. The high mortality rate also influenced population dynamics and societal organization. Communities developed strategies to cope with the constant threat of death, including the careful allocation of labor, the cultivation of surplus food, and the performance of rituals intended to protect the living and honor the dead. Ceremonies, sacrifices, and offerings were performed not only to maintain cosmic balance, but also to ensure health and longevity. Disease and death were thus inseparable from the social, spiritual, and political life of the Maya, shaping behavior, relationships, and priorities. Medical knowledge, while limited, was surprisingly sophisticated in certain respects. The Maya utilized a wide range of medicinal plants, applying herbal remedies to treat wounds, fevers, digestive issues, and other ailments. Certain rituals and chants were believed to enhance the effectiveness of these treatments, combining physical and spiritual approaches. Shamans were highly respected figures, mediating between the human and spiritual realms to diagnose and treat illness. Despite these efforts, the unpredictability of disease meant that even the best prepared communities could be struck down, reinforcing the precarious nature of life in the Maya world. The emotional and psychological impact of mortality cannot be overstated. Families lived with a constant awareness that death could strike at any time, whether from disease, malnutrition, accidents, or violence. This awareness shaped relationships, social norms, and cultural expressions, influencing art, ritual, and mythology. Stories, myths, and religious narratives often reflected the fragility of life and the omnipresence of death, reinforcing the importance of ritual observance, moral conduct, and social cohesion. Life was understood as temporary and uncertain, a reality that demanded vigilance, resilience, and adaptation. Death rituals themselves reflected the integration of mortality with religion, social hierarchy, and cosmic belief. Burial practices varied according to status, wealth, and role within society. Kings and elites were often interred with elaborate offerings, including jade, ceramics, and ritual items, to ensure their continued influence and favor in the spiritual realm. Commoners received simpler burials, but were still subject to ceremonial observances designed to honor ancestors and maintain cosmic balance. These practices reinforced social norms, connected the living and the dead, and provided a framework for understanding and coping with the inevitability of mortality. The constant presence of disease and death also influenced labor and economic systems. Communities had to account for the loss of productive individuals, ensuring that essential tasks such as farming, construction, and resource collection could continue despite population fluctuations. Tribute systems, labor obligations, and social hierarchies were all adapted to accommodate the realities of mortality, reflecting the interdependence of health, labor, and survival. Disease was not merely a private or medical concern. It was a structural factor that shaped every aspect of Maya society. In addition, epidemics and widespread illness could influence political and military outcomes. Leaders were judged not only by their ability to govern or wage war, but also by their perceived capacity to maintain cosmic and societal balance. A ruler's failure to prevent or mitigate disease could be interpreted as divine displeasure, undermining authority and triggering social unrest. The health of the population was thus closely tied to the legitimacy of leadership, and disease became a political as well as a biological threat. The fragility of life under these conditions also fostered cultural resilience and adaptation. Communities developed social networks, collective labor practices, and ritual observances designed to protect the vulnerable, honor the dead, and maintain continuity despite mortality pressures. Knowledge of medicinal plants, environmental observation, and communal cooperation became essential survival skills passed down through generations. The Maya demonstrated remarkable ingenuity and endurance, finding ways to sustain civilization even in the face of constant threats to life and health. Disease and mortality, therefore, were central to the Maya experience. The combination of environmental hazards, limited medical knowledge, malnutrition, and labor demands created a society in which death was omnipresent. Individuals navigated a world in which survival depended on skill, vigilance, ritual observance, and social cooperation. Every aspect of life, from farming and labor to religion and family, was shaped by the ever-present risk of illness and death. The brutal reality of mortality reinforced social hierarchies, spiritual practices, and cultural norms, embedding the awareness of fragility into the very fabric of Maya life. Yet, even amidst these challenges, the Maya civilization flourished. They built monumental cities, developed sophisticated agriculture and water management systems, and created remarkable art, architecture, and literature. Their achievements were made in the context of constant vulnerability, highlighting the resilience, ingenuity, and adaptability of a people who faced disease and death on an unrelenting scale. Life was brutal, precarious, and uncertain, but the Maya endured, leaving a legacy that continues to captivate and inspire the modern world. In essence, the Maya experience of disease and mortality underscores the fragility and resilience of human life. Survival was never guaranteed. Every generation faced the dual pressures of environmental hazard and biological threat. Life demanded constant effort, vigilance, and adaptation, and the consequences of failure were immediate and severe. Mortality shaped family life, labor systems, religious practice, and political authority, reinforcing the harsh realities of existence while simultaneously fostering social cohesion, ingenuity, and spiritual devotion. The Maya civilization, in enduring these pressures, exemplifies humanity's capacity to persevere in the face of unrelenting adversity. Daily life for the ancient Maya was a complex negotiation with a world defined by environmental challenges, social hierarchies, religious obligations, disease, and violence. While the grand temples, palaces, and ceremonial plazas evoke images of a sophisticated civilization, the reality for most Maya was defined by labor, survival, and adaptation. Life was not leisurely or secure. It was a constant balancing act in which every action had practical, social, and spiritual consequences. From dawn to dusk, the Maya engaged in a wide range of activities designed to sustain themselves, their families, and their communities, all while navigating the pressures of a world in which survival was never guaranteed. The cornerstone of daily life for the majority of the population was agriculture. Farming was the primary means of sustenance, and the Maya developed sophisticated techniques to cultivate crops in challenging tropical environments. Maize was the staple, forming the basis of nearly every meal, while beans, squash, chili peppers, and various fruits provided essential nutrients. Farmers faced the ever-present risks of pests, drought, floods, and soil depletion, requiring constant vigilance and adaptability. Fields had to be rotated, plots cleared of vegetation, and crops carefully tended throughout the growing season. Harvests were physically demanding, and the pressure to produce enough food to feed families, pay tribute, and sustain ceremonial obligations weighed heavily on farmers. Success or failure in the fields could determine whether a household survived or faced famine. Water management was another critical aspect of survival. The Maya constructed reservoirs, cisterns, and canals to capture and store rainwater, a task that required both labor and engineering skill. During the dry season, these water systems were essential for agriculture, drinking, and sanitation. The maintenance of these structures fell on the community, with collective effort required to ensure that water remained available when most needed. Access to water was not only a matter of convenience but a crucial factor in sustaining life. The failure of these systems could lead to crop failure, disease, and social unrest, highlighting the interdependence of labor, environment, and survival. Food preparation and storage were equally critical. The Maya developed methods to process maize into masa and tortillas, ensuring that it could be consumed and preserved. They also dried and stored beans, squash, and other produce to provide sustenance during lean periods. Cooking was typically done over open fires or in clay ovens, and the preparation of meals